Hi, Julia. Welcome. So thanks for being with us today. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Julia Kam. Dr. Kam is Assistant Professor of Psychology at the University of Calgary, where she leads the Internal Attention Lab. Her research explores how our brains manage internal attention, which she will tell us a little bit more about today. Julia recently received our grant for her innovative work on the behavioral and neural signatures of mind wandering in naturalistic settings. Welcome, Julia, and thanks for being with us today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
All right. So you received our grant for a project titled Establishing Signatures of Mind Wandering in the Real World, a multimodal approach. Can you tell us a little bit about mind wandering? What is it? Why should we care about it, and why is it important?
Yeah, so it seems like a simple question, but we've actually come up with several different types of ways to describe mind wandering. The more traditional approach and the more common one is to refer to mind wandering as sort of these experiences where we drift away from whatever we're doing right now and from our physical surroundings, right? So you typically think of someone whose sort of minds have just drifted away from the here and now. Another way, and which is a bit more contemporary way to think about it, is to refer to thoughts that sort of just jump from one topic to another. So you might be thinking about your weekend plans and then thinking about your childhood and then thinking about the work that you have to do. So thoughts that sort of just jump from topic to topic, but without any sort of constraints on what you're thinking about is also referred to as mind wandering. But regardless of how we define it, research has shown that we do either of those things about 30 to 50% of the time during our awake hours, which is a substantial amount of time if you think about that. And so in addition to it being fairly prevalent in our everyday life and the fact that everybody does it, we have also shown that it's really closely related to how we perform in our everyday tasks, how we feel. And so it's really has a huge impact on our everyday life. And I think that's one of the main reasons why people like myself are really fascinated by it and just really passionate about studying it.
Okay. So this makes me think the other day I was driving and they were doing construction on the road, and they were expanding the sidewalk, and there were some signs that were like directing the cars to merge to the left lane.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just driving and no music, no distractions, just like nothing. And suddenly I realized like it was way too, like I was way too close to like not merging.
Mm-hmm.
Luckily, I was able to safely and smoothly avoid the construction. But it's one of those moments where it's like, where did my brain go? Like that could have been disastrous, and I was saved by a few seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a line of research that actually looks at these moments of, mind wandering loosely defined during driving. And, I think if you ask anyone, if you're driving from home to work or work to home, how many times or how often do you experience this moment of, I have no idea how I got home, or I have no idea how I got to work? So yeah, it's a very common experience.
All right. And I'm guessing that like most things with our brain, if it happens, it's usually there for a reason. So obviously we can think about maybe the things that happen that are like the downfalls or the problems of mind wandering. Are there any benefits, or why do you think that our brains tend to wander?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think mind wandering just as a term tends to get a pretty bad name. Usually we think, oh, you're not paying attention in class or you're not focusing at work. And we live in sort of a society where it's really about the focus, or paying attention to what we're supposed to be doing. But yes, certainly I think, we're slowly discovering different benefits of mind wandering as well. So for example, depending on what you think about, which is, plays a huge role in sort of how it impacts our day-to-day functions, it can be associated with feeling happier or, sort of more positively. It has also been linked, although the evidence is a little bit more mixed, to creativity. So depending again on kind of how you leverage this experience of your thoughts jumping from one topic to another, it can be helpful for creative processes. And then just generally speaking, if we think about the brain as like a muscle, you can't really focus or work your muscle 24/7, right? So letting your mind step away a little bit from time to time and not putting any sort of control or sort of constraints on it also kind of, I see it more of like as a break, right? So that's stepping away, taking a little bit of a break, resting is what allows you to come back and then focus again. So there's certain benefits absolutely that's linked to the experience as well, but we often times think more so about the negative aspects of it.
Right. Okay. Now I'm thinking about this and about how every day, like more and more nowadays, we're so used to immediately going on our phones when we get bored. So maybe we're not allowing our brains to rest enough. And that's why I'm driving. And suddenly my brain's like, no, we're going to go somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this notion of boredom is also closely linked to mind wandering as well, but we don't allow ourselves to feel bored as often or as frequently as we probably used to without social media and the internet and so on.
Yeah. So what were your goals for this project? Why did you decide to carry on to study mind wandering?
Yeah, so in our lab, we focus a lot on looking at the electrophysiological signatures, so sort of brain patterns that are linked to different types of thoughts. And we've done quite a bit in the lab where, we give them a really boring computer task and they do the task and then they tell us what kind of thoughts they are having. And then we look at the brain signatures of those thoughts. But one thing that I'm really interested in is thinking about, well, do our thoughts differ when we're actually going about in our day-to-day life compared to when we're just doing a really simple computer task in the lab? And do the signatures in the brain of these thoughts differ as well? And so that's really sort of the main goal of this project that I pitched, which is to look at, do brain signatures of different types of thoughts that we have as we're doing our typical day-to-day tasks, what do they look like when we're in that kind of setting?
How do you study these signatures? What do you use? What technology?
Yeah, good question. So in our study, we did a really sort of interesting approach to my mind, where we actually asked participants to just come in to the lab, but do whatever they wish to do. So we did the study actually just coming out of the pandemic, where most of us were just doing whatever we have to do.
Or you could.
Work-wise or school-wise on our laptop anyway. So we thought that was sort of as naturalistic as we can make it. And given all the sort of different restrictions at the university and whatnot, that was the best we could do in terms of designing the experiment. But it actually ended up working out very nicely because participants reported that they were really just doing what they were doing 3 months ago during the pandemic at home. And what we then did was we asked them to do whatever they wish to do. And then we occasionally asked them to report what kinds of thoughts that they were having. Okay. And so that's sort of our way of capturing and assessing the thoughts that participants have. And it's not all about just, are you paying attention to the task or not? But we also look at, were your thoughts sort of freely moving from one topic to another? Were you focusing, or were you, really sort of stuck on something? So, if you had an argument with your partner in the morning, sometimes you just kind of get stuck in that thought for a little longer throughout the day, or were you thinking about certain topics or not? And so we asked them to sort of just characterize their thoughts throughout these tasks, and then at the same time we measure their brain activity using the EEG, and that's what really allows us to sort of get a better understanding of what are the brain signatures of these different types of thoughts when people are just doing tasks that they would normally do anyway.
Okay. It's like a little window into the minds of your willing participants. That's quite interesting. I'm sure that. So, are there any findings or insights that you got from the study that maybe influence the way we should think about our attention or how we go about our day to day?
Yeah, so a lot of our findings actually turn out to be in support of existing findings, which is really nice. So, a lot of the signatures of the different types of thoughts that we found when people were doing their day-to-day tasks actually turns out to be very similar to those that we found during computer tasks that are very boring and mundane that people do in the lab. So that was quite comforting to find out. And what's really striking to us also is that our participants were doing a variety of tasks, right? They were reading, writing, watching videos, playing games, making PowerPoint presentations, and doing all kinds of work or non-work related activities. And yet we found these patterns in their brain that are quite consistent, although there are really interesting individual variability as well, which is something that we're really interested in pursuing as sort of a next direction. But for the most part, there are these sort of brain patterns that seems to be fairly robustly associated with different types of thoughts, such as, are you paying attention to the task, or are your thoughts jumping from one topic to another? And that is sort of what we were hoping to find. And it was nice to actually end up finding that there are these robust patterns of thoughts.
Okay.
And then people are doing whatever they're asked, whatever they wish to do.
And could you tell us a little bit more about these patterns? What are they like, or where are they? What are they called?
Absolutely. So I would say the most common pattern that we've seen in our results is the alpha brain rhythm. So these are just sort of brain activity that cycles through about 10 times per second. And it's a really common brain sort of wave that we see in the brain. And so, for example, when people are not paying attention to whatever they said they were supposed to be doing, we see these alpha waves at the back of the brain.
Okay.
And then if they have reported that they were having thoughts that jump from one topic to another, we see these alpha waves in the front of the brain. And so it's
Interesting.
sort of as foundation for where we want to take the study next in terms of like, can we use this information for example, to then predict the thoughts that participants are having. And by predicting thoughts, I mean just the types of thoughts. Obviously, we don't know exactly what they're thinking about, but we've also applied artificial intelligence on the EEG data and found that we are able to actually detect participants' thoughts offline once we have all the data in terms of what kinds of thoughts that they were experiencing.
Nice. In our offices, we did a study also with EEG with elderly participants.
Yeah.
And for them, it was a real worry that we could actually read their minds, and we had to like make sure to tell them like, no, we're not.
Not quite. Yes, very far away. But, hopefully, at least in terms of our study, we can predict different types of thoughts.
Yeah, sounds really interesting. Also about the individual variations, that's always a nice. I think more and more we're learning that everything is a little bit personalized, and that's I think that's a really interesting thing to pursue as well. So you measured brain activity using EEG tools. So could you tell us a bit about this? What are some of the best and worst things about working with EEG in your experience?
Yeah. So because I've been using EEG for quite some time now, I definitely am, biased towards it. And I think it can reveal so much about the brain. And, it's also fairly portable. So for example, if we wanted to take it outside of the lab as well,
Hmm.
and quite easily implemented. So that's, I think, one of the really nice benefits of EEG. The challenges sometimes is, depending on the electrodes and the system itself, the system that we have ones that are, that uses water, which is really
Hmm.
nice. And then there's a little bit less goop in the hair.
Yeah.
And so it's a little easier to clean out for sure on the side of the participants. There are also systems that, involve gel. And so we, in squirting a lot of gel onto participants' head to facilitate the recording, we do find that it ends up being, there's a lot of gel on the participant's head. So, they'll have to eventually wash it out after
Hmm.
the recording. And I think one of the other challenges is that at the moment, it's still quite, I think, difficult to get a clean signal when there's a lot of movements involved, right?
Yeah.
So the brain signal is actually quite small compared to all the other activities that we do that could end up, being seen in the brain signal that we record from EEG. And so that's, I think, one of the major challenges and would be really nice to resolve at some point if we can actually record EEG while participants are moving around and talking and whatnot.
So maybe that would be something to add, like if you had your ideal system, an artifact proof EEG,
Wouldn't that be amazing? Yes.
maybe with artificial intelligence, we can make that a little bit more possible in the near term.
Yes, that would be the dream.
All right, so we're starting to get to a close. As a mind-wandering researcher, I'm interested to know how your work influences your own life. Has studying this changed how you think about your own attention, or do you do anything differently since you've either learned or studied mind-wandering?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I started to do this type of research thinking that I could cure it,
Okay.
if you will. And this was many, many years ago. I was still a student, an undergrad student at the time. And I think since then I've realized too that it's more valuable to embrace it. And one of the things that I think we've learned through some of our research is that it's most important to know if you can, what you're thinking about when your mind wanders away, and also to be able to sort of regulate when it happens, right? So yes, if you're attending lecture as a student or if you're working and there's a deadline, it would be really nice if you can just focus at the work at hand and not be distracted. But, if you're going for a walk in the woods or doing some chores, it's actually really nice to let your mind kind of roam freely. And we have shown that it's linked to more positive affect. And so I think just being able to have slightly better control over when you do it and what kinds of things you think about is how I tend to think about it now.
That's great. Well, it was great talking to you. I take that away and know that I need to spend more time, let my mind wander a bit more. And I also saw you recently published an article that in nature, it's even a little bit better than just in urban environments. So we should another excuse to get out, get some sun, and spend some time in nature. Thank you,
Absolutely.
Julia, for talking with me today.
And thank you. It was really lovely chatting with you as well.
Great.